Sarah Martinez had walked past that wall 1,000 times. Every nurse at St. Catherine's Hospital had. The peeling paint, the water stains, the cracks in the plaster, it was just another forgotten corner of the old wing, scheduled for demolition in 6 months. But on the night the lights flickered and died, leaving only the glow of her phone's flashlight, Sarah saw something no one else had seen in 56 years. Words, carved deep into the plaster beneath layers of institutional beige paint. A confession, a plea, a name. And it would unravel everything she thought she knew about mercy, truth, and the woman dying 3 floors above her.
Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing.
The fluorescent lights in Corridor C had been temperamental for weeks, but maintenance kept pushing the repair to next month. Why fix what would soon be torn down? St. Catherine's Hospital was preparing to demolish the entire West Wing, the original 1952 structure, to make room for a new surgical center. Sarah had mixed feelings about it. The old wing was drafty. The paint was toxic lead-based layers from 7 decades of quick cover-ups, and the wiring was a fire hazard. But it also had character, history, the weight of thousands of lives saved and lost within its walls. On this particular Thursday night, Sarah was working the graveyard shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. She preferred nights. Fewer administrators roaming the halls, fewer family members asking questions she couldn't answer, fewer doctors treating nurses like ambulatory prescription pads. Night shift was just her, the patients, and the quiet hum of machines keeping people alive. She was heading to the supply closet in the old wing. They still kept backup inventory there, medical supplies that didn't fit in the new automated dispensary system. The lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. Sarah pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, creating harsh shadows on the institutional walls. That's when she saw it. The light hit the wall at an angle it had probably never been illuminated before. The peeling paint, which she'd always assumed was just decades of neglect, revealed something underneath. Sarah stepped closer. Words. No, not words. Scratches. No, deeper than scratches. Carvings. Letters carved directly into the plaster beneath all those layers of paint. She traced her finger along the indentations, feeling the grooves. Someone had taken time with this. This wasn't graffiti sprayed during a teenage dare. This was deliberate, painful, probably done with something sharp over the course of hours, maybe days. Sarah angled her phone to read the message. Forgive me. I tried. Room 237, September 14th, 1968. I can't live with what I've done. M.F. Her heart kicked in her chest. This wasn't a love note or a maintenance worker signature. This was a confession. Something about the words felt heavy, urgent, like whoever carved them had been desperate to leave a mark, to be remembered, to be found. Sarah took several photos with her phone, making sure to capture the carved letters clearly. Then she stood back and stared at the wall. Room 237. That room didn't exist anymore. The entire hallway had been reconfigured in the 1990s renovation, but she could look it up. The lights suddenly buzzed back to life, harsh and fluorescent. The carved message disappeared into shadow, barely visible again under the direct overhead lighting. If Sarah hadn't been there at that exact moment, with that exact angle of light, she never would have seen it. She grabbed the supplies she needed and headed back to the nurse's station. But her mind was elsewhere. M.F. September 14th, 1968. Room 237. What happened in that room?
Sarah couldn't let it go. Over the next 3 days, between patient rounds and medication schedules, she found herself thinking about that message. Forgive me. I tried. I can't live with what I've done. Those weren't the words of someone who'd made a small mistake. Those were the words of someone haunted. On her next shift, Sarah made a decision. She would find out what happened. St. Catherine's kept patient records going back to its opening in 1952, though anything before 1990 was stored in the basement archives, boxes and boxes of paper files that had never been digitized. The hospital kept meaning to hire someone to scan everything, but it was always next year's budget. Sarah waited until her break, then headed down to the basement. The archives were exactly as depressing as she'd imagined. A windowless room with metal shelving units packed with banker's boxes, each labeled with year ranges. She found the box marked 1968, patient records, rooms 200, 250, and pulled it down. The box was heavier than expected. She sat on the concrete floor and opened it, flipping through yellowed files. The paper smelled like mildew and old ink. She found the section for September 1968 and pulled out the file for room 237. There were 3 patient files from that room in September 1968. 1. Harold Thompson, 67, admitted September 2, discharged September 8, pneumonia. 2. Clara Bennett, 54, admitted September 10, discharged September 19, gallbladder surgery. 3. Michael Foster, 7, admitted September 12, died September 14, cardiac arrest. Sarah's breath caught. Michael Foster, died September 14, the same date as the message on the wall. She pulled Michael's file and read through it. 7 years old, admitted for what should have been a routine appendectomy. Surgery went well. Recovery was normal for the first 36 hours. Then on the night of September 14th, the child went into sudden cardiac arrest and couldn't be resuscitated. The attending physician, Dr. Harrison, noted unexpected complications from pre-existing, undiagnosed heart condition. But something about the file felt off. The handwriting changed partway through. The first entries were in one person's neat script, but the final entry, the one about the cardiac arrest, was in different handwriting, more hurried, almost aggressive in its strokes. Sarah photographed the pages. She needed to know more. That's when she heard footsteps behind her. Nurse Martinez. Sarah turned to find Dr. Robert Chen standing in the doorway of the archives room. He was the head of the hospital's internal medicine department, a stern man in his late 50s who ran his floor with military precision. Dr. Chen, Sarah said, standing quickly and brushing dust from her scrubs, I know what you were doing. Security cameras. I got an alert that someone was accessing the archives outside of normal administrative hours. Sarah's stomach dropped. I was just looking up some old patient information. For what purpose? She hesitated. I found something. A message carved into the wall in Corridor C. It mentioned room 237 and a date, September 14, 1968. I was curious. Dr. Chen's expression hardened. Curiosity is not part of your job description, Nurse Martinez. Your job is to care for living patients, not to dig through old files looking for conspiracy theories. It's not a conspiracy theory. A child died that night, and someone carved a confession into the wall. A child died of natural causes over 50 years ago. Whatever you think you found, it's not your concern. This hospital has a reputation to maintain. We don't need nurses playing detective and stirring up ancient history. Put the file back, now. Sarah put the file back in the box, but she'd already photographed the important pages. Dr. Chen stepped aside to let her pass. If I hear that you've been discussing this with anyone, staff, patients, or outside parties, I will have you written up for misuse of confidential medical records. Am I clear? Yes, Dr. Chen. Good. Now, get back to your floor. Sarah left the archives, her hands shaking. But she wasn't scared. She was angry. Dr. Chen's reaction was too strong, too defensive. He wasn't just protecting the hospital's reputation. He was protecting something else. What really happened to Michael Foster?
Sarah went return to her floor, but her mind kept circling back to Dr. Chen's reaction. Why would he care so much about a 56-year-old case? Unless he knew something. Unless there was something to protect. She was logging medication updates at the nurse's station when she noticed something she had somehow missed before. Patient roster for the current floor. Room 412. Margaret Foster, 81 years old, admitted for congestive heart failure. Foster. Sarah's pulse quickened. Could it be a coincidence? She pulled up Margaret Foster's digital file. Date of birth, March 3rd, 1944. That made her 24 years old in 1968. The initials on the wall. M.F. Not Michael Foster. Margaret Foster. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The woman who carved that message wasn't a grieving mother. She was a nurse. And she was still alive. And she was 3 doors down from where Sarah stood right now.
Margaret Foster, Maggie to the nursing staff, had been admitted 4 days ago. She was a quiet patient, polite but distant, the kind of elderly woman who answered questions with the minimum number of words necessary. She didn't have visitors, no family listed in her emergency contacts, just a lawyer's name for advance directives. Sarah had been assigned to Maggie's care rotation, but had barely interacted with her beyond basic vital checks and medication delivery. Maggie spent most of her time staring out the window or sleeping, her hands folded over her chest, her breathing labored but steady. Now Sarah looked at this woman differently. If her theory was correct, Maggie had been a nurse at this very hospital in 1968. She'd been in room 237 on the night Michael Foster died, and she'd carved a confession into the wall. She needed to talk to her, but how? She couldn't just walk in and accuse an elderly heart patient of being connected to a 56-year-old death. The shock alone could trigger a cardiac event. She waited until evening rounds, when the floor was quieter. She knocked softly on Maggie's door and entered. Maggie was awake, sitting up slightly in bed, the television on but muted. She glanced at Sarah with watery blue eyes that had seen too much. "Evening, Mrs. Foster," Sarah said gently. "Just here to check your vitals." Maggie nodded. She extended her thin arm for the blood pressure cuff without a word. Sarah went through the routine, blood pressure, temperature, oxygen levels, all while trying to figure out how to begin this conversation. Finally, as she was logging the results, she said, "Mrs. Foster, can I ask you something personal?" Maggie's eyes narrowed slightly. "Depends on the question. Did you used to work here, at St. Catherine's?" The change in Maggie's expression was immediate. Her face went pale. Her hands trembled. "Why are you asking me that?" Sarah pulled out her phone and showed Maggie the photo of the carved message. "Because I found this in the old wing, and I think you wrote it." For several seconds, Maggie didn't move. She just stared at the photo, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then slowly, tears began to roll down her weathered cheeks. "I didn't think anyone would ever find it. I thought it would be painted over forever, hidden, like everything else." Sarah pulled a chair close to the bed. "What happened, Maggie? What happened to Michael Foster?" Maggie closed her eyes. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I was 24 years old, fresh out of nursing school, working night shifts in pediatrics. Michael Foster was my patient that night, a sweet little boy, just 7 years old. He'd had his appendix removed 2 days earlier, and he was recovering beautifully, laughing, drawing pictures, asking when he could go home. That night, Dr. Harrison wrote an order for pain medication. Michael was complaining about soreness around the incision, normal post-surgical pain. The order was for 5 milligrams of morphine. I read it wrong. I was tired. I'd been working double shifts because we were understaffed. I gave him 50 milligrams. I didn't realize my mistake until 20 minutes later when I went to check on him. He wasn't breathing right. His lips were blue.
I tried to reverse it, but it was too late. He went into cardiac arrest. We couldn't bring him back." Sarah's throat tightened. "That's why you carved the message." Maggie nodded. "Dr. Harrison found me in the hallway afterward. I was hysterical. I told him what I'd done. And he made a choice. He said if we reported it, my career would be over, I'd face criminal charges, maybe prison. He said it wouldn't bring Michael back. So he altered the records. He wrote that Michael had an undiagnosed heart condition. He made it look like a tragic accident, not negligence. And you let him?" "I was a coward," Maggie said, her voice breaking. "I let Dr. Harrison protect me because I was too terrified to face what I'd done. But I couldn't live with it. I carved that message into the wall because I needed someone, someday, to know the truth. Then I quit. I left nursing. I left this hospital. And I spent the next 56 years trying to disappear." Sarah sat back, processing everything. "Why did you come back here? After all these years?" Maggie's laugh was bitter. Irony. Cruel, stupid irony. "My heart's failing. This was the closest hospital to my apartment when I collapsed. The ambulance brought me here. When I realized where I was, I almost refused treatment. But I'm too much of a coward for that, too. I couldn't even die with dignity." Sarah looked at this broken woman, this elderly patient who'd carried a crushing secret for more than half a century. "Maggie, you made a terrible mistake, but you were human. You were overworked, exhausted. It was a systemic failure as much as a personal one. That doesn't bring Michael back." "No," Sarah agreed. "It doesn't. But punishing yourself for 56 years doesn't either." Maggie closed her eyes. "What are you going to do? Report me?" Sarah didn't know. She honestly didn't know. Sarah left Maggie's room with her mind racing. She had a confession to a medical error that resulted in a child's death. By law, she should report it. By ethics, she should report it. But by every measure of human compassion, what would that accomplish? Maggie was 81 years old, dying of heart failure, and had already lived a lifetime of punishment. She was walking back to the nurse's station when her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We need to talk about Margaret Foster. Meet me in the old wing. Corridor C. Midnight. Come alone. Dr. Chen." Sarah's blood glowed cold. How did Dr. Chen know I talked to Maggie? Was he monitoring her? And why did he want to meet in the old wing in the middle of the night? Every instinct told her this was a bad idea, but she needed answers. At 11:55 p.m., Sarah headed to Corridor C. The lights were working now, but the hallway still felt oppressive, heavy with history. She found Dr. Chen standing in front of the carved message, his hands clasped behind his back. "Nurse Martinez," he said, without turning around. "Thank you for coming." "How did you know I talked to Maggie?"
"I didn't, but I know you. You're stubborn, curious. You wouldn't let this go." He finally turned to face her. "I need you to understand something. This isn't about protecting the hospital. This is about protecting someone who doesn't deserve to have her final days destroyed." Sarah frowned. "You knew about this? About what happened to Michael Foster?" "Not until yesterday," Dr. Chen admitted. "After I found you in the archives, I did my own research. I pulled the file, I read the autopsy report, the real one, not the altered version, and I made some calls to retired staff who worked here in the 60s. One of them remembered Maggie, remembered the night Michael Foster died, remembered seeing Dr. Harrison change the records. So, you know she's guilty." "I know she made a mistake," Dr. Chen corrected. "There's a difference. Guilt implies intention. Maggie didn't intend to harm that child. She was a young nurse, overworked, undersupported, in a system that set her up to fail. Dr. Harrison knew that. That's why he covered it up. That doesn't make it right."
No, Dr. Chen agreed. It doesn't. But here's what you need to know, Sarah. I'm not going to report this, and neither are you. Sarah's jaw tightened. You can't make that decision for me. Yes, I can, Dr. Chen said firmly, because I'm the head of this department, and if you report this, I will personally ensure that you are investigated for accessing confidential patient files without authorization, for violating HIPAA regulations, and for harassing a vulnerable elderly patient. I will make your life professionally miserable. Sarah took a step back, shocked. Are you threatening me? I'm protecting Maggie Foster, just like Dr. Harrison protected her 56 years ago. Sometimes, Sarah, the right thing to do isn't the legal thing. It's the human thing. Michael Foster's family deserves to know the truth. Michael Foster's family is dead, Dr. Chen said quietly. His parents passed away in the 90s. He was their only child. There's no one left to tell. No one left who would want to know. No one left who would benefit from the truth. All it would do is destroy Maggie in her final days. Sarah felt tears prickling her eyes. So we just let it go. Pretend it never happened. We let her die in peace. That's all she has left. A few days, maybe a few weeks, and then it's over. He walked past Sarah toward the exit, then paused. You have a good heart, Nurse Martinez. Don't let it turn you into someone who causes harm in the name of justice. Sometimes mercy is braver than truth. And then he was gone. Sarah stood alone in Corridor C, staring at the carved message on the wall. Forgive me, I tried. What was she supposed to do?
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Sarah didn't sleep that night. She lay in her apartment bed, staring at the ceiling, torn between truth and mercy. By morning, she'd made a decision. She would talk to Maggie again. Not as a nurse, not as someone investigating a crime, but as someone who wanted to understand. When she arrived for her shift that evening, she went straight to Maggie's room. But when she opened the door, she found it wasn't empty. There was someone sitting in the chair beside Maggie's bed. A young man, maybe 30 years old, with dark hair and tired eyes. He looked up when Sarah entered. "You must be Sarah," he said. "Maggie told me about you." Sarah froze. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "David Foster," the man said, standing and extending his hand. "Michael Foster was my uncle. Maggie is my mother." The room spun. Sarah grabbed the doorframe to steady herself. "What?" Maggie, lying in the bed, with her eyes closed, spoke without opening them. "Surprise." David gestured for Sarah to sit down. She did, her mind reeling. "I don't understand," Sarah said. "You said you killed Michael Foster. He was your patient." "He was," Maggie said, finally opening her eyes. "But he was also my nephew, my older brother's son." The pieces started clicking into place, but they formed a picture Sarah hadn't expected. My brother, James, and his wife Rachel were the perfect family. They had Michael, smart, healthy, beautiful. And they had me, the little sister who wanted so desperately to be like them, to help people, to save lives. So I became a nurse. When Michael came into the hospital that night, I was so proud. I was going to take care of my nephew. I was going to be the one who helped him recover. But I made a mistake, a fatal mistake, and I took their son from them. David sat back down, his jaw tight. My grandparents, James and Rachel, never recovered. Their marriage fell apart 6 months after Michael died. My grandmother had a breakdown. My grandfather started drinking. They divorced. My father was born 2 years later, but he was born into a family that was already shattered. My grandparents both died young. My father grew up angry, broken, and he passed that brokenness to me. Sarah looked between them. You knew? All these years, you knew what Maggie did? I found out 5 years ago, when my father was dying of liver failure. He told me the truth. He said his mother, Maggie, had killed his older brother, that she'd been a nurse at the hospital and had given Michael the wrong medication. He was furious, bitter. He wanted me to find her, to make her pay. But you didn't. I did find her. It took me 2 years, but I found her, and I was going to confront her. I was going to make her confess, make her feel the pain my family felt. He paused, but when I found her, she was already living in hell. She lived alone. No friends, no family. She'd spent 56 years punishing herself. What more could I do to her? Maggie's voice was barely a whisper. David came to my apartment 6 months ago. He told me who he was. And I waited for him to scream at me, to hurt me. But he didn't. I couldn't, because I realized something. My father's anger destroyed him. It poisoned every relationship he had. It killed him just as surely as the alcohol did. And if I held on to that anger, it would destroy me too. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks. So you forgave her? I'm trying to, David said honestly. I don't know if I'm there yet, but I'm trying. And when Maggie told me she was coming to this hospital, that her heart was failing, I knew I had to be here. Not to punish her, but to witness, to understand. Maggie reached out a trembling hand toward David. He took it. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve anything. But I'm grateful, so grateful that you're here. Sarah excused herself from the room, her mind reeling from what she'd just learned. This wasn't a simple case of medical error and cover-up. This was a family tragedy that had rippled across 3 generations. And now, at the end, the 2 survivors were trying to find peace. But there was still one problem: Dr. Chen. Sarah needed to tell him that Michael Foster had family, that there was someone who deserved to know the full truth. She paged him to meet her in Corridor C again. When he arrived, she explained everything about David, about the family connection, about the revelation that Maggie had been Michael's aunt. Dr. Chen listened in silence. Then he said something that changed everything. Sarah, David Foster already knows the truth. He's known for 6 months. I know, he told me. No, Dr. Chen interrupted. You don't understand. David came to me 3 weeks ago, before Maggie was even admitted. He told me his grandmother was dying and that she would probably end up at this hospital. He asked me to watch over her, to make sure she was treated with dignity. And he told me the whole story, about Michael, about the medication error, about the cover-up. Sarah's eyes widened. You knew? All this time? You knew? Yes, Dr. Chen said. And when you found that message on the wall, when you started digging into the archives, I panicked. I didn't know if David wanted the truth to come out publicly. I didn't know if Maggie knew David had contacted me. I was trying to protect both of them. So when you threatened me, I was bluffing, Dr. Chen admitted. I was trying to scare you off the case because I didn't know what the right answer was. But David just called me 20 minutes ago, and he told me you'd met him, and he said I should tell you everything.
Everything? Sarah asked. What else is there? Dr. Chen pulled out his phone and showed Sarah an email. It was from David Foster, dated 3 weeks prior. Dr. Chen, thank you for agreeing to meet with me.
As I explained, my grandmother Margaret Foster will likely be transferred to St. Catherine's Hospital in the coming weeks as her heart failure progresses. I am writing to make an unusual request. My grandmother carries the burden of what happened to my Uncle Michael. She has carried it for 56 years. She carved a message into the wall of your hospital, a confession, a plea for forgiveness. I have spent the last 6 months getting to know her, understanding her pain, and beginning my own healing process. I am asking you to preserve that message. When the West Wing is demolished in 6 months, I am asking that the section of wall with her carving be removed and preserved. I want to donate it to your hospital's historical collection, along with a full account of what happened on September 14, 1968. Not to punish her, but to honor Michael, and to ensure that no other nurse ever has to suffer in silence the way my grandmother did. We need to change how we treat medical errors. We need to create systems where people can admit mistakes without having their lives destroyed. We need to learn from the past, not bury it. Please let me know if this is possible. David Foster. Sarah read the email twice, her vision blurring. He wants to make her confession public? After all this? Read his follow-up email, Dr. Chen said, scrolling down. Dr. Chen, I spoke with my grandmother tonight. I told her about my request to preserve the wall carving. She cried, then she said yes. She said if her pain, her mistake, her 56 years of silence can help prevent even one other nurse from going through what she went through, then it will have meant something. She's ready to tell her story, but only after she's gone. She doesn't want publicity. She doesn't want interviews. She just wants to leave something behind that matters. Thank you for considering this. David. Sarah looked up at Dr. Chen, tears streaming down her face. So all of this, the investigation, the confrontation, the secrets, it was all leading to this, to turning tragedy into education? Not just education, Dr. Chen said quietly. Redemption. For Maggie. For David. For everyone who's ever made a mistake in medicine and felt like they had to hide it. Sarah wiped her eyes. What do you need from me? I need you to help me convince the hospital board to approve David's request. I need you to help me create a memorial that honors both Michael and Maggie. And I need you to help me build a better system, one where nurses like you can report errors without fear, where patients are protected, and where human beings are treated with the compassion they deserve. Sarah nodded. I can do that.
3 weeks later, Maggie Foster passed away peacefully in her sleep. David was holding her hand. Sarah was in the room, having volunteered to be Maggie's primary nurse for her final days. In those weeks, Sarah had heard more stories about Maggie's childhood, about her dreams of becoming a nurse, about the night Michael died, and about the 56 years that followed. Maggie's funeral was small. Just David, Sarah, Dr. Chen, and a few other hospital staff members who'd gotten to know her in her final days. There was no public announcement, no obituary that mentioned her connection to St. Catherine's Hospital. But that changed 2 months later. The hospital board approved David's request. The section of wall with Maggie's carved message was carefully removed before the demolition began. It was preserved under glass and installed in the hospital's main lobby, accompanied by a plaque that read, "In memory of Michael Foster, 1961 to 1968, and Margaret Foster, 1944 to 2025." On September 14, 1968, 7-year-old Michael Foster died at St. Catherine's Hospital due to a medication error. His aunt, Margaret Foster, a young nurse, administered the wrong dosage. Consumed by grief and fear, She left nursing and carried the burden of her mistake for 56 years. Before leaving the hospital, Margaret carved this message into the wall, a silent confession, a plea for forgiveness, a mark of her pain. This memorial honors both Michael and Margaret. It stands as a reminder that medical errors are not signs of moral failure, but of system failures. It calls us to create environments where healthcare professionals can report mistakes without fear of retaliation, where learning replaces punishment, and where compassion guides our response to human error. Margaret's grandson, David Foster, donated this artifact to ensure that his uncle's death and his grandmother's suffering would create positive change. May we honor their memory by building a healthcare system that treats both patients and providers with the dignity they deserve. The memorial's unveiling made national news. Medical journals wrote about it. Nursing schools added it to their curricula. And St. Catherine's Hospital implemented a new just culture policy, one that distinguished between human error, at-risk behavior, and reckless conduct, ensuring that healthcare workers could report mistakes without fear of losing their careers. Sarah was promoted to a newly created position, Patient Safety Advocate. Her job was to investigate near misses and errors, not to punish staff, but to understand system failures and implement changes. She thought of Maggie every single day. David Foster started a foundation in Michael's name, funding research into medication safety systems and supporting nurses who'd experienced the trauma of making serious medical errors. He called it the Second Chance Foundation, because everyone deserved a second chance, even those who'd made terrible mistakes. Sarah stood in the lobby of St. Catherine's Hospital, staring at the preserved wall section. Visitors often stopped to read the plaque, and she'd seen more than one nurse standing in front of it with tears in their eyes. Today, a young nurse, couldn't have been more than 23 years old, stood in front of the memorial, crying softly. Sarah approached her gently. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked. The young nurse nodded, wiping her eyes. "I'm sorry, I made a mistake yesterday. Not a big one, but it could have been. And I was so scared to report it. But then my supervisor told me about this memorial, about Margaret Foster, and I realized I had to speak up, not just for my patient, but for myself." Sarah put a hand on the young nurse's shoulder. "You did the right thing." "Did you know her, Margaret Foster?" "I did, in her final days. She was one of the bravest people I've ever met." "I don't understand how she's brave. She made a mistake that killed the child." "She's brave because she lived with that mistake for 56 years and still found a way to turn it into something meaningful. She's brave because she let her story be told so that nurses like you wouldn't have to suffer in silence. That takes courage." The young nurse nodded slowly, looking back at the carved message behind the glass. "Forgive me, I tried." "Do you think she ever forgave herself?" the young nurse asked. Sarah thought about Maggie's final days, about the peace that had settled over her face when David held her hand, and about the last words she'd whispered before she died. "Thank you for finding me." "I think," Sarah said carefully, "that she learned something more important than forgiveness. She learned that our mistakes don't define us. Our response to them does. She spent 56 years hiding, but in the end, she chose to be found. She chose to let her pain mean something. And that's what makes her story powerful." The young nurse took a deep breath. "I'm going to go talk to my supervisor now about what happened yesterday." "Good," Sarah said. "And remember, the fact that you're scared means you care. Don't ever lose that." The young nurse walked away, her shoulders a little straighter. Sarah stood alone in front of the memorial. She pulled out her phone and took a photo, not of the carved message, but of the people walking past it, stopping to read, reflecting. The lobby was full of life.
Patients being wheeled to appointments, families waiting anxiously, doctors rushing between emergencies, and nurses, so many nurses, just trying their best. This was what Maggie had wanted. Not fame, not vindication, just the chance to turn her darkest moment into a light for others. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Chen. Board meeting in 20 minutes. They want to expand the Just Culture program to 3 more hospitals. Bring your notes. This is happening. Sarah smiled. She typed back, "On my way. Maggie would be proud." As she walked toward the elevator, Sarah glanced back one more time at the memorial. The afternoon sunlight was streaming through the lobby windows, illuminating the carved words beneath the glass. "Forgive me. I tried." And Sarah whispered, to no one and everyone at once, "You did more than try, Maggie. You succeeded." The elevator doors closed, and Sarah headed upstairs to change healthcare forever.
2 weeks after Maggie's death, Sarah stood in the hospital administrator's conference room, facing a panel of 12 board members. Dr. Chen sat beside her, a thick folder of documents on the table between them. David Foster sat in the back row, quiet but present. The board chairman, a silver-haired man named Gregory Walsh, looked skeptical. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Dr. Chen. You want us to preserve a piece of wall from a condemned building, install it in our lobby as a public memorial, and use it to announce that a nurse who worked here in 1968 killed a child through medical negligence?" "That's not quite accurate," Dr. Chen said calmly. "A nurse made a medication error that resulted in a child's death. There's a significant difference between killing someone and making a tragic mistake." "The family will sue us," another board member said. "Even after all these years, they could claim we covered it up. This is a liability nightmare." David stood up from the back row. "May I speak?" Chairman Walsh looked surprised but nodded. "You're David Foster, correct? The family member?" "Michael Foster's nephew, Margaret Foster's grandson, and the person who requested this memorial. I want to be very clear. I will not be suing this hospital. I have signed legal documents waiving any right to litigation related to my uncle's death. Those documents are in the folder in front of you." He paused, looking each board member in the eye. "My family was destroyed by what happened in 1968, but not because my uncle died. Children die in hospitals. That's a tragic reality. My family was destroyed because the system forced my grandmother to hide her mistake, to live with guilt and shame for 56 years, to suffer in silence because admitting the truth would have meant criminal prosecution and the end of her career." "With all due respect, Mr. Foster," one of the board members said, "your grandmother did kill the child. There should be consequences for that." "There were consequences," David said, his voice tight with emotion. "She quit nursing the next day. She never worked in healthcare again. She isolated herself from her family. She lived alone for 5 decades, punishing herself every single day. She carved a confession into a wall because she had no other way to speak the truth. What more consequences do you want from an 81-year-old woman who just died?" The room fell silent. Sarah stood up. "May I share some data with you?" Chairman Walsh gestured for her to continue. Sarah opened her laptop and projected a presentation onto the screen. "These are statistics from Johns Hopkins on medical errors. Every year in the United States, medical errors contribute to over 250,000 deaths. That makes it the 3rd leading cause of death in this country, behind only heart disease and cancer." She clicked to the next slide. "But here's what's important. Most of these errors are not caused by incompetence or negligence. They're caused by system failures. Overworked staff, confusing medication labels, poor communication, inadequate safety protocols. The same factors that led to Michael Foster's death in 1968 are still killing people today." Another slide. "Hospitals that have implemented just culture policies, policies that distinguish between human error, at-risk behavior, and reckless conduct, have seen error reporting increase by 300% and actual patient harm decreased by 40%. Why? Because when healthcare workers feel safe reporting mistakes, we can fix the systems that allow those mistakes to happen. But those hospitals didn't put memorials in their lobbies announcing past medical errors, a board member pointed out. No, Sarah agreed. They didn't. Which is exactly why this memorial would be groundbreaking. It would send a message to every healthcare worker who walks through our doors. We acknowledge that errors happen, we understand that you're human, and we're committed to creating systems that support you rather than destroy you when mistakes occur. Dr. Chen stood up. I've been practicing medicine for 35 years. I've seen brilliant doctors quit because they made one error and couldn't live with the shame. I've seen nurses develop PTSD after adverse events. I've seen the suicide rate among healthcare workers climb every single year. And I've watched as we've maintained a culture of blame and punishment that makes everything worse. He placed both hands on the table, leaning forward. This memorial isn't about celebrating Margaret Foster's mistake. It's about acknowledging a systemic failure and committing to do better. It's about showing our staff that we value honesty over perfection. And it's about honoring both a child who died and a woman who spent her entire life trying to atone for a moment of human fallibility. Chairman Walsh sat back in his chair. This is unprecedented. Good. Because the way we currently handle medical errors isn't working. My grandmother's story could have ended differently. If she'd worked in a system where she could report her error immediately, if there had been safety protocols to catch the dosage mistake, if she'd had access to mental health support after Michael died, maybe she could have continued her career. Maybe she could have saved thousands of other lives in the 56 years she spent in isolation. Maybe my family wouldn't have been destroyed by secrets and shame. He pulled out a document from his briefcase. I've established a foundation in Michael's name. We're prepared to donate $5 million to St. Catherine's Hospital to fund the memorial, develop a comprehensive Just Culture program, and create a support system for healthcare workers who experience adverse events. But the donation is contingent on this hospital being brave enough to tell the truth about what happened in 1968. The board members exchanged glances. $5 million was not a small amount. We'd need to consult with our legal team, Chairman Walsh said carefully. Of course, take your time. But understand this, I'm offering this to St. Catherine's first because this is where it happened. This is where the change needs to start. But if you decline, I'll take this offer to every major hospital in the country until I find one brave enough to say yes. This memorial will exist somewhere. The only question is whether St. Catherine's wants to be the hospital that leads the way or the hospital that was too afraid. Sarah added, and consider this, in 6 months the West Wing will be demolished. That wall, with Margaret Foster's message, will be destroyed. We have a small window to preserve it. After that, the opportunity is gone forever. Chairman Walsh looked at his fellow board members. We'll need to vote on this, but I'm willing to fast-track the decision. Dr. Chen, Nurse Martinez, Mr. Foster, thank you for your presentation. We'll have an answer for you within 1 week. The vote was 8-4 in favor. The memorial would be built. Sarah got the news via email while she was working a night shift. She immediately called David. They said yes, she told him, her voice shaking with emotion. On the other end of the line, David was quiet for a long moment. Then, Maggie would be proud. She would be, Sarah agreed. When do you want to start the planning? As soon as possible. I've already hired a preservation specialist to remove the wall section. I've got an architect designing the display. And I've been working with the medical ethics specialist to write the plaque text. I want to make sure we get this right.
Over the next 3 months, Sarah watched the memorial take shape. The wall section was carefully removed, preserved under glass, and installed in the hospital's main lobby. The plaque was written and rewritten a dozen times, with input from David, Dr. Chen, the hospital's ethics committee, and a focus group of nurses and doctors. The final text struck a careful balance. It acknowledged the tragedy of Michael's death, honored Margaret's 5 decades of suffering, and used both of their stories to call for systemic change in how healthcare handles medical errors. The memorial was unveiled on a gray Tuesday morning in November, exactly 6 months after Maggie's death. The hospital invited local media, nursing schools, patient advocacy groups,
and anyone from the community who wanted to attend. Sarah stood near the back of the crowd, watching as David stepped up to the microphone. He looked older than he had 6 months ago, the weight of his family's history visible in the lines around his eyes. "My Uncle Michael was 7 years old when he died," David began. "I never met him. He died 16 years before I was born. But his death shaped my entire family. My grandfather became an alcoholic. My grandmother had a nervous breakdown. My father grew up angry and broken. And my Aunt Margaret, the nurse who made the medication error that killed Michael, spent 56 years in exile, punishing herself in ways the legal system never could." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "For most of my life, I thought this story was about justice, about right and wrong, about punishment and accountability. But after meeting Margaret, after hearing her story, after understanding the impossible situation she was in as a 24-year-old nurse working double shifts with inadequate support and no safety systems, I realized this story isn't about justice at all. It's about mercy." David gestured to the memorial behind him. "This wall section contains my aunt's confession, carved in desperation when she had no other way to speak the truth. For 56 years it was hidden beneath layers of paint. Now it stands in this lobby where thousands of people will see it every day. And I hope when they see it, they'll understand that the opposite of error is not perfection. The opposite of error is learning." He stepped aside and Dr. Chen approached the microphone. "Medical errors are the third leading cause of death in America," Dr. Chen said bluntly. "But we don't talk about them. We hide them. We punish the people who make them. And in doing so, we guarantee that the same errors will keep happening because no one feels safe enough to report them." He looked directly at the nurses and doctors in the crowd. "Many of you in this audience has made mistakes. Maybe they caused harm. Maybe they were caught in time. But you know the fear that comes with error, the terror that your career will be destroyed, that you'll be sued, that you'll be labeled as incompetent or careless. That fear keeps you silent, and silence kills." Dr. Chen's voice softened. "Margaret Foster made a terrible mistake, but she was also failed by the system she worked in. She was overworked, the medication labels were confusing, there were no double-check protocols, there was no safety culture, and when the error happened, she had no support system, no way to process the trauma, no path forward except to hide or be destroyed." He gestured to the memorial. "This changes today. St. Catherine's Hospital is implementing a comprehensive Just Culture program. We're hiring patient safety advocates. We're creating error reporting systems that focus on learning rather than punishment. We're establishing mental health support for healthcare workers who experience adverse events. And we're committing to transparency about when things go wrong and what we're doing to prevent them from happening again." Sarah felt tears on her cheeks. This was really happening. Change was really happening. The program continued with speeches from nursing school deans, patient advocacy groups, and medical ethicists. But the most powerful moment came at the end, when a current nurse from St. Catherine's Hospital stepped up to the microphone. Her name was Jennifer Torres, and Sarah recognized her, a pediatric nurse with 15 years of experience, well respected by her colleagues. "3 years ago, I made a medication error," Jennifer said, her voice shaking but steady. "I gave a patient the wrong dose of insulin. The patient went into hypoglycemic shock. We caught it in time and the patient survived, but it could have been fatal." The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. "I reported the error immediately even though I was terrified. And do you know what happened? I was suspended for 2 weeks without pay. I had to undergo remedial training, and for the next year, every time I walked into work, I felt like I had a scarlet letter pinned to my chest. My colleagues whispered about me, administrators watched me constantly. I developed anxiety so severe that I couldn't sleep the night before shifts. Jennifer's voice broke. I almost quit nursing. The career I loved for 15 years became a source of constant terror. Not because I didn't care about my patients, but because I cared so much that the thought of hurting someone again was unbearable. She looked at the memorial. When I read about Margaret's story, I cried for an hour because I understood exactly what she felt. The guilt, the shame, the isolation. And I realized that if the system doesn't change, I could end up like her, carrying this burden for the rest of my life, unable to forgive myself, unable to move forward. Jennifer looked directly at the hospital administrators in the crowd. I'm grateful that St. Catherine's is implementing this just culture program. But I want to be clear. Changing the policy isn't enough. We need to change the culture. We need to believe in our hearts that people who make errors are not bad people. They're human beings doing impossibly difficult work in imperfect systems. And they deserve support, not punishment. The applause was thunderous. After the ceremony, Sarah found Jennifer standing in front of the memorial, staring at Margaret's carved message. "Thank you for speaking up," Sarah said quietly. Jennifer turned, wiping her eyes. It was terrifying. But after reading about Margaret's story, I realized that staying silent is more terrifying. At least if I speak up, maybe the next nurse won't have to go through what I went through, what Margaret went through. That's exactly why this memorial exists, Sarah said, to break the silence. Jennifer reached out and touched the glass covering the carved words. Do you think she knew? Before she died, do you think Margaret knew that her story would change things? Sarah smiled. She knew it, and it gave her peace. 5 years later, the Just Culture program that started at St. Catherine's Hospital had spread to over 200 hospitals across the country. Medication error reporting increased by 300%, not because errors were happening more frequently, but because healthcare workers finally felt safe enough to report them. And with reporting came learning, and with learning came change. Medication errors decreased by 40% in hospitals that implemented the program, nurse burnout rates dropped, patient safety outcomes improved dramatically, and it all traced back to a carved message on the wall, hidden for 56 years, waiting to be found. David Foster's foundation had grown beyond his wildest expectations. He'd funded the development of new medication dispensing systems that used biometric verification and AI-assisted double-checking. He'd created support groups for healthcare workers dealing with the trauma of medical errors. He'd lobbied for legal protections for healthcare workers who reported mistakes in good faith. But his favorite project was the traveling exhibit.
The man was quiet for a long moment. 2 years ago, I missed a diagnosis. A 14-year-old girl came into the ER with abdominal pain. I thought it was appendicitis. I was wrong. It was an ectopic pregnancy that ruptured. She almost died. Sarah waited, letting him speak at his own pace. She survived, the man continued. But I've never forgotten it. I've never forgiven myself. And I've never told anyone except my wife and the hospital's risk management team. But seeing this, he gestured to the memorial. Seeing that someone else understood what it felt like to make a mistake that could have killed someone, I don't know, it helps somehow. Did you report what happened? Sarah asked gently. Yes, immediately. And my hospital handled it well, actually. They reviewed the case, identified what went wrong, changed some protocols. I went through counseling. I wasn't punished. But I still think about that girl every single day. I still wonder if I should be a doctor, if I deserve to be a doctor. Sarah understood that feeling. Can I tell you something Margaret Foster's grandson said to me once? The man nodded. He said, "My aunt's mistake didn't make her a bad nurse.
It made her a human being who made a tragic error while doing impossibly difficult work. The tragedy isn't that she made the mistake. The tragedy is that the system forced her to carry it alone. The man's eyes filled with tears. I'm not carrying it alone. I have support, but it still feels unbearable sometimes, Sarah offered. Yeah, that's normal, Sarah said. Medical errors are traumatic events, not just for patients, but for providers too. What you're feeling is a natural response to trauma. It doesn't mean you're weak or unfit to practice medicine. It means you're human. The man wiped his eyes. Does it get easier? Sarah thought about this carefully. It doesn't get easier exactly, but it gets different. You learn to carry it. You learn to use it to make you more careful, more thoughtful, more compassionate. You learn that making a mistake doesn't define you. How you respond to the mistake defines you. The man nodded slowly, looking back at the memorial. I'm glad this exists. I'm glad someone was brave enough to tell the truth. So am I, Sarah said. They stood together in silence for a few minutes, two healthcare workers at 2 a.m., honoring the memory of a woman who had carried her burden alone for 56 years so that they wouldn't have to. Finally, the man said, I should go. Long drive home. Drive safe, Sarah said. He walked toward the exit, then paused and turned back. Thank you for talking to me, for understanding. Anytime. That's why we do this work. Not just to heal patients, but to heal each other. After he left, Sarah stood alone in the lobby. The memorial was beautifully lit, Margaret's carved words clear and sharp beneath the glass. Forgive me. I tried. Room 237, September 14th, 1968. I can't live with what I've done. M.F. Sarah placed her hand on the glass, as she had done hundreds of times over the past 5 years, and she whispered the words she always whispered. You did more than try, Maggie. You changed everything. You made your pain mean something, and because of you, thousands of people won't have to suffer the way you did. That's redemption. That's grace. That's love. The words carved into the plaster seemed to glow in the soft lighting. Not just the confession anymore, not just a plea for forgiveness. A promise, a legacy, a gift to everyone who would come after, carrying their own burdens, making their own mistakes, trying their best in an impossible profession. Sarah thought about all the lives that had been touched by this story. The young nurse who triple-checked her medications, Jennifer Torres who found the courage to keep nursing after her error, the doctor from County General who drove across town at 2 a.m. to see proof that he wasn't alone, the 200 hospitals that had implemented just culture programs, the thousands of patients who had never experienced medical errors because healthcare workers now felt safe reporting near misses and system failures. All of it traced back to one woman's desperate act, carving a confession into a wall when she had no other way to speak the truth. Margaret Foster thought she was hiding her shame, but she was actually planting seeds. Seeds that would take 56 years to bloom, but would grow into something beautiful when they finally did. Sarah took one last look at the memorial, then headed toward the exit. Tomorrow she had meetings about expanding the Just Culture program to 3 more hospitals. She had a keynote speech to finalize for a national conference. She had a dozen emails from nurses and doctors asking for advice about implementing error reporting systems at their facilities. The work was never done. There would always be more hospitals to reach, more people to educate, more systems to change. But tonight, walking out of St. Catherine's Hospital into the cool night air, Sarah felt something she didn't often feel in healthcare. Hope. Hope that things were getting better.
Hope that the next Margaret Foster would have support instead of silence. Hope that the next Michael Foster might be saved by a system that learned from past mistakes instead of hiding them. She looked up at the hospital building, at the lit windows where nurses and doctors were working through the night, making decisions, doing their best, being human. "Thank you, Maggie," Sarah whispered to the night sky. "Thank you for being brave enough to leave a message. Thank you for trusting that someone would find it. Thank you for letting your story matter." Somewhere, Sarah liked to imagine, Margaret Foster was finally at peace. Free from the burden she had carried for 56 years. Free from guilt and shame and silence. Free to rest, knowing that her darkest moment had become a light for thousands of others. That was the secret message on the hospital's oldest wall, that even our worst mistakes can become our greatest gifts, if we're brave enough to bring them into the light. And Sarah Martinez, who had found that message on a dark night when the lights were flickering, would spend the rest of her career making sure no one else's confession ever had to stay hidden for 56 years. The truth had been found, the silence had been broken, and healing, real, lasting, transformative healing, had finally begun.
The hospital had created high-resolution replicas of the memorial, and these replicas traveled to nursing schools and medical conferences around the country. Alongside each replica was a comprehensive display: photos of Michael Foster as a smiling 7-year-old, excerpts from Maggie's journal documenting her 56 years of guilt, video interviews with David about forgiveness and healing, and data showing how the just culture approach had saved lives. The exhibit was called Hidden Voices: From Silence to Safety. Sarah had been promoted to Vice President of Patient Safety for the entire hospital network, 6 hospitals across 3 states. But she still worked clinical shifts once a month because she never wanted to lose touch with the reality of bedside nursing. Tonight was one of those clinical nights. She was working in the pediatric ICU, caring for a 10-year-old girl recovering from a car accident. The girl's mother sat beside the bed, exhausted and frightened, holding her daughter's hand. "She's going to be okay," Sarah told the mother gently. "The surgery went well. She's strong." The mother nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. Thank you for taking care of her." Sarah checked the girl's IV, adjusted her pain medication, and updated the chart. Everything by protocol. Everything double-checked. Everything as safe as modern medicine could make it. But Sarah knew that safety was never absolute. Errors would still happen. People would still make mistakes. The question was whether those mistakes would be caught, reported, learned from, or hidden beneath layers of paint waiting 56 years to be discovered. As Sarah left the room, she passed a young nurse in the hallway. Couldn't have been more than 25 years old, maybe in her first year out of nursing school. The young nurse looked stressed, checking and rechecking her medication cart. Sarah stopped. "Everything okay?" The young nurse looked up, startled. "Oh yes, I'm being extra careful. I'm about to give pain meds to the patient in 412 and I keep triple-checking the dosage because I'm paranoid I'll mess it up." Sarah recognized the fear in the young nurse's eyes. It was the same fear she'd seen in Jennifer Torres, the same fear she'd seen in Margaret Foster's face in those final days. "Being careful is good," Sarah said gently. "But remember, if you're ever unsure about something, ask for help. That's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of good judgment." The young nurse nodded. "I know, it's just, I keep thinking about the memorial downstairs, about Margaret Foster, about how one mistake ruined her entire life." Her mistake didn't ruin her life. The system's response to her mistake ruined her life. If she'd worked here today with our current protocols, that error probably would have been caught before it reached the patient. And even if it wasn't, she would have had support, counseling, a pathway to learn and grow rather than hide and suffer. The young nurse considered this. "So, you're saying I shouldn't be afraid to make mistakes?" "No,
You should absolutely try to avoid mistakes. But you also need to understand that you're human, working in a complex system, making hundreds of decisions every shift. Some of those decisions will be wrong, and when they are, you need to report them, learn from them, and trust that the system will support you rather than destroy you. That's hard to believe, the young nurse admitted. I mean, I know that's the policy now, but it's still scary. It is scary, Sarah agreed. Margaret Foster was scared too, so scared that she stayed silent for 56 years. Don't make her mistake. If you ever have a concern, a question, or realize you've made an error, speak up immediately. That's how we keep patients safe. That's how we keep you safe. The young nurse took a deep breath. Okay, thank you. She walked toward room 412, her shoulders a little straighter. Sarah watched her go, then continued down the hallway toward the nurse's station, but she paused at the window, looking out at the city lights below. Somewhere in this city, in hospitals across the country, nurses were making decisions. Some of those decisions would save lives. Some would make no difference. And some, inevitably, tragically, would cause harm. The question was what happened next. Would those nurses have the courage to speak up? Would the systems support them? Would the culture believe that human beings deserved compassion even when they made terrible mistakes? Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled through her photos until she found one from 5 years ago. A picture of the memorial on the day it was unveiled, with David standing beside it, his hand resting on the glass covering her aunt's carved confession. She had shown this photo to hundreds of audiences over the past 5 years. She had told Margaret's story in keynote speeches, at medical conferences, in nursing school classrooms. And every time she saw the same reaction, recognition. Because everyone who worked in healthcare understood what Margaret felt. Everyone had experienced that moment of terror when they realized they might have made a mistake. Everyone had felt the weight of holding human lives in fallible human hands. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from David. Just finished a site visit at Seattle General. They're implementing the full Just Culture program. The nursing director cried when she saw the memorial replica, said it was exactly what her staff needed to see. Margaret's story is reaching people, Sarah. It's changing things. Sarah typed back. She'd be proud. And David, too. Their pain is meaning something. David's response came quickly. Thank you for finding that message on the wall. Thank you for not looking away. None of this happens without you. Sarah smiled through tears. She wasn't sure that was true. Maybe someone else would have found the message eventually. Maybe the demolition crew would have discovered it. Maybe it would have been photographed and posted online, becoming a viral mystery. But maybe not. Maybe it would have been destroyed, ground to dust along with the rest of the old wing, and Margaret's confession would have died with her. Sarah thought about all the moments in the past 5 years where things could have gone differently. If she hadn't walked down Corridor C that exact night when the lights were flickering. If she hadn't looked at the wall from that exact angle. If she hadn't been curious enough to investigate. If Dr. Chen had successfully scared her away. If David had already found and forgiven his grandmother. If Maggie had refused to tell her story. So many moments where this could have ended differently. But it didn't. Against all odds, the truth had come to light, and it had changed everything. It was 2 a.m. when Sarah finished her shift. The hospital was quiet, most patients sleeping, only the essential staff moving through the dimmed hallways. Sarah stopped by the lobby on her way out, as she often did, to look at the memorial. A man was standing in front of it. He looked to be in his 40s, wearing scrubs from a different hospital. He was staring at Margaret's carved words with an expression Sarah had learned to recognize. The expression of someone who understood, on a deeply personal level, what those words meant. Sarah approached quietly. It's powerful, isn't it? The man startled, then nodded. Yeah, I'm a doctor from County General across town. I've been meaning to come see this since I heard about it. Finally made the drive tonight after my shift. What made you want to see it?
Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.